In this video we're going to take the Python backend, which was created in the last video, and give it a nice front end using the Svelte framework and Skeleton UI. We'll get started by taking all of the files for our Python application and putting them in a folder called backend. And then we can create the front end application by doing npm create skeleton-app at latest, and front end is going to be the folder that we're going to put all of our front end application in. As the application is being created, we just select the options from the menu that we wish to use in our project. For this I'm going to use the bare-bones skeleton app, this skeleton theme, the Tailwind forms, typography, code blocks and pop-ups, TypeScript syntaxing, ESLint, Prettier, PyTest and Svelte Inspector. We'll let that install and then we can enter the front end directory and we'll install all the packages using npm install. Now that everything's installed, we need to add a few more scripts to the package.json file. We'll add a start script. We'll update the dev script to include the host and port numbers. And the production script, which will also do the same as the dev script. We can test that the application works by doing npm run dev. And we can see that the bare bones application is running. We can now start to change the application to our front end that we require. We'll do this by going into the source, routes and page.svelte, and then I'll replace the file contents with the application that I've created. And the final change that's needed to the front end application is to include the domain name of the backend API. This can be done by getting the domain name from the application on DigitalOcean and pasting it into the fetch request. Now we can start to amend the backend Python file. In the main.py file we need to include the FastAPI cause middleware, which is for cross-origin resource sharing. We'll include the origins of the local host and the port number. And in the app add middleware section we'll include the cause middleware, and the methods and headers can just include all for now. We can also remove the home route from the backend as it will no longer be needed. Over in DigitalOcean we need to update the source directory of our Python application to be backend. And now we need to update the HTTP request routes to include the /API route, as that's how the front end will access the backend Python API. We can now create the front end application by creating the resource from source, choosing GitHub and the Dice API repository. We'll select the directory as front end, and then we can start to select the resources for the application. We'll drop the resource size down as it's not a large application. The run command will be our run prod, which was set up earlier, and the port is correct for the application. Now that everything's correct, we can choose to create the resource. And now we'll update the HTTP request routes again to remove the route path, and update our cause to include the methods and headers as we've set in the Python backend. We'll do the same on the cause for the backend to make sure that the methods and headers are correct for the application. And there we go, the application's now live. We can see on the screen that the inspector console shows the value being returned from the API, so the Python application is working correct in the back end. We're getting no cause errors, and the front end is updating to match the value that's been returned. This is obviously just a simple example of how to create a Svelte front end for a Python API. We could now change the Python application to do anything that we need in the background, and change the front end application to create a smooth user interface. In my opinion, this is a lot easier than creating a graphical user interface for a desktop, and the ability to quickly host the application on DigitalOcean makes it even easier.